Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Brain injury is exactly as serious as it sounds. Yet somehow, when we call it concussion, it's not always taken as seriously. Well, tonight we do. First, we'll speak to TSN's Rick Westhead, whose new book details the tragic trajectory of Stanley Cup champion Joe Murphy after multiple incidents of head trauma. Then, a conversation about the grueling effects of non-sport concussions. Yes, too many of those happen as well. It's Monday, the 1st of February, and that's next on the agenda. This is a story that on the face of it makes no sense. A hockey-playing phenom out of Newmarket, Ontario, becomes the #1 overall draft pick of the Detroit Red Wings in 1986. 4 years later, wins a Stanley Cup with the Edmonton Oilers, makes millions of dollars. How did that guy end up broke, fighting drug addiction, and homeless? Well, TSN's Rick Westhead tells this tragic and important tale in Finding Murph. How Joe Murphy went from winning a championship to living homeless in the bush. And Rick joins us now from the provincial capital. Rick, first of all, kudos to you for telling such an important story so well. The book is terrific. I want to go back, though, and for those who don't remember Joe Murphy or don't know anything about him, let's start there. What made him so special early on in his either junior or university career that made people take notice and say, wow, that guy's got something?
Well, to start with, Steve, thank you for having me on to talk about this subject. Joe was a remarkably skilled player. This guy was among the fastest players in the National Hockey League at the time that he played. Guys who played with him and coaches who coached him described someone that would skate with abandon to the front of the net to try to disrupt a goalie, into the corners, sometimes maybe elbows high. Whatever it took to win a puck battle, Joe Murphy was willing to do. And obviously, as you pointed out, #1 pick overall in 1986. He also came into the NHL as a winner. He played his junior hockey in Penticton, British Columbia, after his family had moved to the west coast of Canada. And then he, instead of playing junior hockey as so many, major junior hockey as so many hockey players do, he went the other route. And he played NCAA hockey for Michigan State and led that team to a national championship before becoming the #1 overall pick.
Here's his former teammate, Adam Graves, describing him in the documentary you did on this subject for TSN. Sheldon, let's roll that clip if we can.
There was a reason he was first overall. He was such a skilled guy, and his speed, and he had that glide.
Murphy right in, he shoots, he scores! Murphy with surprising speed, he showed it in the first period.
He wasn't a small guy either. He was strong on his skates. He had a quiet edge to his game, but he could absolutely fly.
Here's Joe Murphy, and he scores!
And yet, in spite of all that, Rick, he was up and down to the minors from Detroit. It was a real bumpy start for him. Admittedly, he's only in his early 20s at the time, but what was going wrong?
Well, even before he hit the age of 20, Steve, he ran into a problem with his first NHL coach, Jacques Demers. Demers was in his first season coaching the Detroit Red Wings and really wanted to make an impression on players. So here comes young Joe Murphy in his first NHL season, and he's actually living with the family of Pat LaFontaine, with LaFontaine's parents. LaFontaine, of course, an NHL All-Star as well. NHL All-Star. There's two airports in Detroit, and on one of the team's first road trips of the season, Joe describes how he left for the airport. The team hadn't told him that there was 2 airports there. He wound up going to the wrong one, missed a flight, and next thing you know, he's in the doghouse and is on his way to the minors. Like I said, Demers wanted to make an impression, and Joe was one of the guys that he thought he could do that with.
Both sides got very disillusioned with each other, and then, Joe was only 21 years old, and the team essentially gave up on him and sent him to Mark Messier's Edmonton Oilers, which turned out to be a wonderful thing for him. They won a Stanley Cup there in 1990, and he got the final goal in the final game for the Oilers in a game where, there they go, shoots, he scores, and Murphy hoists the Stanley Cup shortly after this. At this moment of his life and career, How were things for him?
Well, I'd say that this was the high point. Maybe not financially. Those days were yet to come in terms of when he would become a coveted free agent. But he had found the perfect team to play with. He, like you pointed out, Mark Messier, Kevin Lowe, some real experience, a veteran presence on that Oilers team. Glenn Anderson, a player who, like Murphy, was known for having amazing speed. And a number of guys that I talked to who played on those Oilers clubs just talk about what it was like for young players like Murphy to come in. You know, they often ate together at Messier's apartment and talked about life and pursuits outside of hockey. One of the players, Jeff Smith, who broke in with the team, painted a really vivid picture about how his father came into the locker room one day, and basically Kevin Lowe and Messier were asking him, like, can we get you a coffee? How many creams would you like in that? Just a real family vibe in Edmonton, and I think that suited Joe so well.
Now, sadly for Joe, the love did not last, because not long thereafter, well, you described this as the turning point of his life. He got clocked in a game by a player named Sean Burr. What happened at that moment, and what was the impact?
It was early 1991, and Joe was coming around his own net and pick up the puck, and I guess was getting ready to go on one of his patented trademark end-to-end rushes. The problem was he had his head down looking at the puck, and Sean Burr saw this and came in and body checked him. Joe left his feet, went backwards into the end boards, and the way he tells it, his face hit the boards where the plexiglass and the boards meet. Oof. He said that he had a fractured skull, that he wound up still playing in the game, went down on a breakaway later in the same game, but instead of shooting the puck on the net, shot the puck wildly into the corner. And then coming back on the back check, one of his teammates grabbed him by the jersey and pulled him off of the ice. Now, it's really interesting, Steve. You would think that in a case like that, a player might go to the hospital for an MRI scan or a CAT scan to see a neurologist or a neuropsychologist, you know, even spend a night over in hospital, but this didn't happen. Joe continued on with his NHL team, continued on the road trip that they were on, and continued to play and began to self-medicate. Again, amazing pain that he was feeling in his head. So he started taking painkillers and trying to look after the symptoms on his own.
But I got to ask the obvious follow-up question. What was he doing back on the ice in a game where he basically, you know, had his brains bashed in? Why was he not done for the day?
Well, that is an obvious question, and it's one that has come up time and again with the National Hockey League. You know, we hear this expression, bell rung. We see players brought to when they're literally unconscious with smelling salts, given a pat on the butt, and allowed to pick up in the same play. And it's a great question. Why is this happening? What does the medical staff of NHL teams believe that others don't believe? Remember, boxing is an interesting comparison, Steve, because in the 1950s, there was a rash of serious injuries and deaths in the ring. So much so that in New York State, regulators introduced new rules that said that any boxer knocked unconscious couldn't get back in the ring, even to train, for a month, up to a month. So you could have a boxing match at Madison Square Gardens on a Friday night, a boxer knocked out and told you are done for a month. And the very next night, you could have an NHL game at the same arena, a hockey player knocked unconscious the same way the boxer was, only this time a trainer could bring smelling salts out, wake him up, and he's right back in the play.
Well, you've got Dr. Charles Tatter, who's one of the leading experts on concussions in the world. He works out of Toronto. You've got him in the book saying that the NHL has a kind of an ostrich with its head in the sand attitude towards injuries. What did he mean by that when he told you that?
Well, what he meant is that you don't have to subscribe to the Lancet Medical Journal to understand what the leading research on brain injuries is. All you have to do is watch the news and read the newspaper. These studies have been coming out for decades, and they've been obvious for anyone to see, whether you're a team doctor, a league doctor. The evidence is there. The evidence that has tied repeated brain trauma to long-term problems, neurological problems. Back in 1930, Steve, the NCAA came out with a code of conduct, a handbook for athletes, and it suggested that players not be allowed to return to play after several concussions. That's in the 1930s during the Depression. And those rules, I don't know that they've ever been followed by NHL teams, you know, even to this day.
Let's get back to Joe's story. Things don't work out in Edmonton. He wants a lot of money. They don't want to give it to him. He's traded to Chicago. One of his teammates there says, boy, there's a lot of demons in that guy. Then he moves on to St. Louis. He gets into cocaine. Things got so bad, apparently, in St. Louis, Rick, he claimed at one point that he had been poisoned. What was the story there?
There's a lot of stories from Joe's time in Chicago and then on in St. Louis. This was a guy who, as you point out, has always kind of been beat to a different drum. You know, he is an eccentric by anyone's description. Imagine a player in such a monoculture that hockey is, carrying the Celestine Prophecies book around with him for a season, talking about astrology with his teammates and other guys in the NHL. He believed he was poisoned by someone on his team, and he wound up in hospital. The doctors told him that he had actually had acute food poisoning. But he called his father late one night saying, listen, they want to amputate my hand. I can't let them do that. He really, Steve, by the time he was in St. Louis, did start exhibiting some really disturbing behavior. And it's impossible, really important to point out, it's impossible to say that this is all because of the brain injuries that he suffered in the NHL. Was it because of self-medication? Was it because of cocaine use? Was it because of alcohol? I think all those things probably combined to lead to this problem that he had. But what we do know is that when Joe's NHL career finished, he filed a workers' compensation case against the league, And as part of that legal process, Joe was sent to a neuropsychologist on the West Coast in California. And he was diagnosed by a medical professional as having post-concussion syndrome. So again, we do have a diagnosis that definitively linked the brain injuries that he suffered playing in the NHL to the neurological damage that he still is living with today.
I want to read an excerpt from your book here, which really does reflect how damaged goods this guy was by the time he's now in San Jose. And things got even increasingly more bizarre when he was out there. Here comes the excerpt. The whole game, Murph is sitting at the end of the bench and screaming at Coach Daryl Sutter, I can help you. I can effing help you. Sutter ignores him. Finally, in the third period, there's an icing and a TV timeout, and the second they blow the whistle for the icing, Joe jumps over the bench and goes to the face-off circle. He stands there with his stick down on the ice, ready to take the face-off for a full minute and a half. So the TV timeout finishes, and the guys skate to the face-off circle, and Murph is not moving. The center, who Daryl sent out, starts to skate back to the bench, and Daryl is screaming at him, losing it. Get the F back there. It was unbelievable. Murph just wouldn't come off. But then, in another game, Joe goes out for a shift and is on the ice for like 4 seconds, comes back to the bench. Daryl asks, what's wrong? And Murph says, Joe's tired. Joe can't play. He drove Daryl crazy. Rick, this is just not normal behavior, obviously, in professional sports. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think Joe is already showing some symptoms then of the mental health issues that he's still battling with today. Remember, Daryl Sutter coached the Chicago Blackhawks when Joe Murphy played in Chicago. So he wanted him later, when Daryl Sutter was coaching San Jose, he wanted Joe on his team. And I guess that what that says, what the takeaway is, as long as you can contribute in a professional team on the ice, and you're not too much of a distraction in the clubhouse or in the locker room, there's going to be a place for you. Joe clearly could still play. He was one of the leading scorers with San Jose, but by that time he was already exhibiting all kinds of disturbing behavior, shaving his whole body with a Bic razor, again, talking more about astrology and gorillas in Rwanda, and giving all of the players in the locker room very different nicknames. We're, of course, used to nicknames in pro sports, but nicknames that just were coming from out of left field.
To the best of your knowledge, did any team ownership, management, coach, player, anybody try to stage an intervention and get him the help that he clearly needed?
I can't say whether that happened or not. I know that in Washington, that Joe, the coach there, was so disturbed, Ron Wilson was so disturbed by Joe's behavior that he asked him to go see a psychologist. I don't know what the results of that examination were. Joe confirmed that happened while he played in Washington. Again, Washington was very nearly the final stop in his NHL career just before he played with Boston. But again, there's all kinds of things going on in this man's head, and it's impossible to say definitively that one thing led to the problems that he has now.
I gather after his professional career ended, you got a tip that he was living up in the bush in Kenora, Ontario, homeless. So you drove up there and you went to look for him. And what kind of a Joe Murphy did you find when you found him?
That's right. I got a tip and I reached out to Trevor Kidd. I was told that Kidd, another former NHL player, a goalie, had also heard about Joe's situation. Trevor lives in Winnipeg and he has a trailer in Kenora, Ontario. So we agreed, we hadn't met before, but we agreed that I'd fly to Winnipeg and that Trevor and I and a TSN crew would drive east across the border back into Ontario and we'd try to find Joe. And the agreement was that if we did find Joe, that Trevor would have a conversation with him, ask what help he could offer, whether Joe wanted any help, and then would make, at the end of that conversation, would explain to Joe that there was a TSN crew and that we were hoping to talk with him. And if Joe had said, I don't want to be public about this in any way, we would not have filmed a frame with Joe. We would have turned around and come back to Toronto. But he wanted to tell his story. And then as the visits, as I visited Kenora more to understand more about Joe's story, and this opportunity for writing a book presented itself, I asked Joe, are you sure that you want me to do this? Are you sure you want to go ahead with this? And Joe said yes, for several reasons. First, it made him feel, in his words, more relevant than he had in years. And second, he was really hoping that this would add to the conversation, the very conversation that we're having now about what the NHL's obligations are to both legal, moral, ethical, to its current and its former players and to their families.
So the guy you found was intelligent enough or capable enough of understanding and making rational decisions, yes?
Yes, and again, that was not the opinion necessarily that I came up with. That was the findings of the police because Joe had already been in hospitals for a psychiatric examination in Kenora. The doctors decided that he was mentally fit to make his own decisions and released him. And I made sure that I got that same advice from Joe's lawyer in Kenora, his criminal defense lawyer, because Joe was actually in the process when we met of defending himself against a charge of assault. And his lawyer as well assured me that Joe was able to make these kinds of decisions on his own. So really, to be fair, I relied on professionals to reach that decision.
Did it appear to you as if he were still using drugs?
Yeah, it did. From time to time, I'd visit his hotel room and there would be drug paraphernalia on the bed and on the floor. One of the things that was a real eye-opener was just the problem that many small and large, I suppose, as well, Canadian communities are facing right now with fentanyl and opioid use. I remember walking through the baseball park in the middle of Kenora and talking to parents who volunteered with the local Little League there, and they would tell me that before games started, that they had to walk through the infield and outfield as well as the dugout, just doing a step-by-step search of the field to make sure that there weren't any needles still there when their kids got ready to play. So Joe was certainly not alone in the fact that he was using.
Rick, let's broaden the discussion now and talk about the fact that several years ago, I guess a guy who was probably the greatest player in the game at the time, Sidney Crosby, got himself concussed during the course of a game and he missed a whole year. How much, in your view, did that wake up the NHL to the notion that we really have to take better care of our players because they're the game and, no stars, no players, no game?
I'd love to see some evidence that it has woken the NHL up and that they do show signs of wanting every player to take the time that they need to heal before they come back. But I can't help wonder whether there's different rules for a player like Sidney Crosby, who, as you say, was the best player in hockey, making, $10 million a year. I wonder if the rules are different for Sidney than they are for a player who's a fourth-line player making the league minimum. Let's look at the evidence, Steve. 3 years ago, Eric Lindros, a Hockey Hall of Famer, went to the NHL All-Star Game. And his wingman for that trip was Dr. David Mulder. Dr. Mulder has been the Montreal Canadiens' chief surgeon since the 1960s. And they sat down and they asked the NHL for a simple request. They said, will you please commit $1 million per team to researching brain injuries? It's been 3 years. They still don't have a response from the NHL. $1 million, to put it in context, we're talking about a $5 billion industry in good times. $1 million would roughly pay for what a team might pay for a fourth or a third line player.
You managed somehow to get a hold of internal NHL emails among very high-ranking officials, the commissioner included, the deputy commissioner included. What did those emails indicate to you about the level of concern the NHL has about head injuries?
Well, I think they paint a disappointing tale. You know, in 2007, you have one of the top lawyers for the NHL corresponding with Gary Bettman and others about what the best way forward is and whether the NHL should invest in understanding the mental health of retired players. And she writes to her colleague that she'd rather leave these issues like dementia to the National Football League to figure out with its retirees and focus on the here and now for the NHL. We've also learned that there's this really interesting transition that takes place once a player goes from current player to former player and management. And on one hand, they're in this brotherhood, these one of 700 jobs that hockey players in the best league in the world enjoy. But then they become management and you start to see something different. And I can remember, Steve, reading the meeting minute notes when NHL general managers meet and seeing these former players who had become GMs ask and raise some interesting questions. One former player who is now a general manager was wondering whether stretchers were being brought on the ice prematurely, too early, and whether that was too dramatic and really made the game look bad. Another former player who was a general manager wondering players who were getting up off the ice after hitting their head and holding their head like this, like showing symptoms of dizziness and balance problems. Maybe those players were just looking for a vacation in the middle of the season. That was a really hard thing to reconcile, how that transition went from former player to general manager. And one more, if I could. Back in 2013, the head of the Canadian Medical Association calls out the NHL in an open letter and is concerned about the number of player brain injuries. And so there's an internal discussion amongst NHL executives about how to respond to the Canadian Medical Association. And Frank Brown, a former hockey reporter who is now helping to run the PR for the league, writes to an NHL lawyer saying, "Don't worry, I got this." He writes that Hockey Day in Canada is coming up, and that's the perfect white noise to write a response to this imbecilic, dumbass doctor. And I thought, wow, if in private there is that much scorn for one of the top medical minds in Canada, how can you have any confidence that this is a league that really is taking this problem seriously?
Well, let me just, for argument's sake here, put the NHL's position to you. And in the interest of full disclosure, you and I not too long ago were on a Zoom call with dozens and dozens of so-called hockey people. And Glenn Sather, who's a pretty big name in NHL history, he's got a bunch of Stanley Cup rings, Edmonton Oilers, New York Rangers. He basically said, you're not giving the league any credit at all for the progress that it has made over the last couple of decades in recognizing this issue much more today than it once did. Does he have a point?
Absolutely. And he has a right to an opinion, and he has a point. Is it the same as it was in the 1950s and the 1960s? No. But I would argue that the media, there's enough people doing what we do who celebrate the NHL and take the NHL's word for it when they talk about progress. One of the big things that the league holds up as a sign of how much it's moved into the future is this concussion spotter program. And for people who don't watch hockey very closely, the NHL has these spotters, and their job is to sit and watch games. And if they see players who are showing signs that they might be concussed, they're supposed to call down to the bench and have those players removed to be evaluated by a doctor. But imagine the issue if it's in the final seconds of a Stanley Cup final game, and one of the star players, Austin Matthews with the Toronto Maple Leafs, or Connor McDavid with the Edmonton Oilers, is holding their head after they get off the ice with a minute left in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. We still don't know who the concussion spotters that the league has hired are. How can that be? If you pick up an NHL media guide, the identity of everyone working for a team in literally any capacity is public, except for the concussion spotters. So, Steve, you help me understand. Does that make any sense? Wouldn't you want to be as transparent as possible?
Okay, having said that, how much of the issue here is that players, I don't know if this is an issue at all. You discussed it in the book, and I want to get your take on it. A lot of players don't seem to have much respect or regard for the fact that when they get a guy with his head down, you could be ending, never mind his career, but his life. Do you think the players' lack of respect for each other is a factor here?
I think that's an open question. I'm not a hockey guy. I don't watch the game. I don't watch all the games. I'm not a beat reporter. So I don't think I'm in the right position to say whether that lack of respect is an issue. What I do know is the question about the respect that players have for one another is a constant. People were asking this question in the 1970s when there was mayhem on the ice during every game. And even today, they're still asking the question.
Let's finish up on this. Do you know where Joe Murphy is now?
To the best of my knowledge, he's in Saskatchewan somewhere. There was a local news report, CTV did an interview with Joe this past summer in Regina. So he had moved west from Kenora to Regina, but I haven't talked to him in a while. So I can only hope that as the temperature turns and it gets much colder, that he'll, find somewhere to seek shelter and be safe.
Amen to that. Finding Murph, how Joe Murphy went from winning a championship to living homeless in the bush. Rick Westhead, the author and documentary maker for TSN. Rick, it's awfully good of you to spend so much time with us on TVO tonight. Thanks so very much.
I really appreciate you bringing light to this and giving me the chance, Steve. Thank you.
Not at all. "23 years ago today, a future Hall of Famer named Paul Kariya sustained a vicious cross-check to the head during an NHL game. If you're squeamish, you may want to look away, but here's what it looked like.
And he was leaning too. Watch, he has to reach out for the puck. Oh, man. Well, that's twice as bad as I thought it was. That was a cross-check to the chin and the neck. Nope.
It was Kariya's fourth concussion in 3 years. Remarkably, he came back to play for another decade, but sustained 2 more concussions. Eventually, the headaches and memory loss were simply too much, and he retired in 2011. However, Kariya's career prompted 2 Ontario twin sisters, who were huge hockey fans, to devote their lives to understanding concussions better and to promoting improved awareness, treatment, and prevention. They are known on YouTube as the STEAM Sisters for their videos on science communications. So let's welcome, in the north end of Etobicoke, there are Sandhya and Swapna Mylabathula. That's Sandhya on the left. Sandhya is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto in kinesiology and physical education, and Swapna on the right is an MD PhD candidate at the U of T's Faculty of Medicine. Let's also welcome, in San Francisco, La Chigolo, Mexico, Calypso Kenny, and in Scarborough, Ontario, Hugo Fung, both of whom have sustained non-sports related concussions, which is a huge and overlooked part of the story that we're going to focus on now. And I'm glad to welcome everybody to TVO tonight for this discussion. Sandhya, get us started here. We, of course, all know about sports-related concussions. They get a lot of attention. But what about off the ice or off the field? Let's say at work. How do people typically sustain concussions in the workplace, for example?
That's a great question. Thanks, Steve. So concussions can happen mainly, we see it in sports, in the media, so that's something that stays in our minds, but it can really happen in any context in our lives. So workplace is one place, but also on the road is another massive place, on the playground, or even just at home. And in the workplace, one of the most common causes is slips, trips, and falls.
And there's some other ways that it's very common in the workplace, including being struck by an object, whether that's, installing something above your head, losing grip, and having it strike you in the head or in some other fashion.
Or even just on the road while in a workplace setting. Or even with things, just people actually striking other people is another common.
So the 4 top ways that it can happen in the workplace.
Okay, and Swapna, you're doing particular research on the elementary and secondary years in schools. How do kids get concussed at school? Obviously on the pitch or on the playing field we understand, but away from there, how does it happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question, too. So, of course, sports represents a lot of concussions that happen in youth. But when we're looking at the younger subset of that population, we're looking at young children, falls is a very big factor. And that actually does come back into play again when we go through the age spectrum and look at older adults again.
And how well, Swapna, do you think teachers are, and for that matter, other administrators at schools, how well are they trained? I mean, everybody can recognize a cut or a split lip or a broken leg, but concussions, that's tougher. Are they well trained enough to notice those and diagnose them if they have to?
That's a very big question. So there's ongoing research happening about this. And I think we can say that compared to several years ago, we see very good progress in terms of education and training available for the different stakeholders. Coaches and teachers and students themselves do have access to training and education in Ontario, thanks to things like Rowan's Law and Policy Program Memorandum 158 in Ontario. We do see some gaps still in terms of how well certain stakeholders are reached. We see time and time again parents can be reached better, and then there's some certain groups like school administrators that perhaps can have more access to education and training more regularly.
And this actually translates to the general population. According to the Canadian government, only 1 in 2 Canadians actually has little or no knowledge of a concussion, so only 50% of the population has some knowledge of a concussion.
And about 25% of the general public in Canada knows how a concussion is treated or managed, so that does leave room for improvement.
Indeed. And then 40% of Canadians only have some knowledge about the tools and resources that are available around concussions.
So we need to increase awareness and access to those resources for sure.
Okay. So the summary there is that has increased.
Yeah, Sandhya, let me pick up on that right now, because if you don't know you've been concussed, which I gather is happens all the time, what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So concussions themselves are an invisible injury because, as you mentioned, if you can see a cut or a broken bone, that's a lot easier. But with a concussion, it's not very visible, so the onlooker wouldn't necessarily know that somebody had a concussion. So that could mean that the individual, if they're not sure that they had a concussion, might miss out on that acute period right after the injury that's so important to actually manage it correctly. If you don't do that, risk for more complications further down the line and a longer recovery period, and potentially also a lower quality of life during that period and that longer effects after that as well.
Okay, we've got some real-life examples here of people who've been through this, so let's go to Mexico. Calypso, okay, you're in Mexico now, but where are you from originally?
From Toronto, but I was living on Vancouver Island before this.
Okay, and tell us about your concussion history. Where, when, how did you sustain it?
I was volunteering at a horse stables at the time, and I was actually chasing a miniature horse across a field, and I dove to grab the rope that attached to the horse's halter, and when I stood up suddenly, I slammed the back of my head into a wooden beam on a fence. So it sounds like a really silly accident, and in fact, I didn't know I had a concussion, and I kept working for 3 more hours, and it wasn't until I realized I could no longer have conversations with people, and I would find myself in the middle of the stable with no idea what to do, that I knew there was something seriously wrong.
And how old were you when this happened?
This was 2 years ago, so I would have been 29.
And was there anybody around to help you after it happened?
No, I was just working by myself, and I thought, oh, that hurt. I guess I'll have a bruise later.
You thought you'd have a bruised head, but that was it?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you were having difficulty having a conversation, which is when you first noticed it. Just tell us a bit more detail around that. How were the words coming out, which presumably, I mean, it must have been a bit scary, wasn't it?
It was. It was my first concussion, so I was trying to talk to someone at the horse stables, and I realized that words were coming at me, and I couldn't seem to put together sentences to respond to them. And I didn't quite know what to do or what was happening. And I'm usually a very on-top logical person. So finding myself in the middle of work, just wondering what I was doing, was quite frightening. I still didn't know I had a concussion at that point. I took my bicycle and biked home for 20 minutes and thought this will pass in another hour, but it didn't.
Let me just run over to Swapna for a second. Can I assume that when you've sustained a concussion, getting on a bicycle or continuing to work or something like that is probably not the best treatment for a concussion?
That is an excellent assumption. And it's difficult, though, because when you don't recognize that you're experiencing a concussion, you may just, do exactly what you were doing before, carry on doing your activity, go home, whatever it might be. And that's dangerous because your brain is very vulnerable in that moment and you're open to further injury. And that is something that we really want to avoid. So we see in a lot of the concussion guidelines out there, whether that be in sport or whether that be outside of sport, that removing yourself from activity is immediately is a very important factor so that you can start the recovery process.
Now, Calypso, you mentioned it was your first concussion. Have you had others?
No, thankfully, no. I've been really careful since then. And every time I bang my head, I freak out and worry I'm going to have another because that one was so horrible. But I've been lucky and just one.
Good. Okay, so far so good. Now, at what point in that drama did you actually get treatment and come to understand that you, in fact, had a concussion?
It actually took me a while. I was very stubborn, and I went to my real job the next day on a farm, which has a lot of loud noises and physical activity. And by the end of the day, I realized I was too sick to ride my bicycle home. So I was very lucky to have an understanding boss, and she drove me to the doctor the next morning, and he told me that it was likely I had a concussion. So I didn't start my treatment until at least 24, 48 hours afterwards.
Now, again, I'm going to flip over to Sandhya here for a second. This kind of, I'm just going to tough it through. I'm just going to power through. I'm not going to acknowledge that anything's wrong. How typical is that?
It's actually quite typical, and part of this is because the symptoms that you might experience with a concussion can actually be seen in a wide variety of situations, whether it be another condition or disorder or just a headache. So somebody might just think that they just have a headache for a day or so, and then finally a little bit later on realize that they've had a concussion. And as we've mentioned, having that management and that treatment happen acutely immediately after the injury is so important to avoid the longer term effects as much as possible. So that can be quite important and a bit tricky there for people.
Yeah.
And a quick follow-up, Sandhya. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's particularly tricky because, as my sister is saying, there's a lot of conditions and disorders that mimic the symptoms. So we can talk about chronic pain, depression, PTSD, developmental disorders like ADHD. There's a lot of similar symptoms. So those symptoms of a concussion are nonspecific, which do make it very tricky for the diagnosis and for recognition by the individual themselves, which is why awareness is so important to figure out, this is a context in which concussion can happen, what you're feeling could be a concussion, and to, play it safe and err on the side of safety.
So let's hone in then with Calypso on how did you actually conclusively know that you'd had a concussion?
The doctor basically told me, he said, you have all the symptoms for a concussion. It sounds like you banged your head really hard. He said there's no test he could give me that says 100% you have a concussion. But he told me I should treat it like a concussion and take 1 week off work and just be at home. Don't listen to a lot of noise. Make sure that I don't have the lights on and just relax.
So that's the treatment. Just basically do nothing for a week.
It was hard, but I'm glad I did.
And did you feel better after the week was over?
I did. I wasn't at 100%, but I went back to work because I was losing my paycheck at that point. So I'm glad I took a week off, and I did start to feel better.
Okay, thank you for that. Hugo, let's go over to you in Scarborough. And again, I'm going to ask you many of these similar questions. Where, when, and how did you sustain your concussion?
So I actually got my concussion at the beginning of my master's, which was in November 2017. And how it happened was that I was driving home because I wanted to go home and work on a presentation that was due 2 days from then. And as I was driving home, the right lane, it was ending, and there's a car that was in my blind spot that almost sideswiped me. And obviously, I just want to go home and work on my presentation. So tried to avoid that accident, but I ended up getting myself into another accident. So rear ended the car in front, and the car in front hit another car.
Yikes. Okay, so what happened? Your head go into the steering wheel, or tell us what happened? How did you get the actual concussion?
So all I remember is, from my car, at least once you're about to hit something, it starts beeping. And that's all I remember is just beep, 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 and then boom. And then the next thing I know, I got out of the car and just threw up on the sidewalk. So it was definitely a first for that. Never had that experience before, and hope I never have to, and no one else has to.
Where did you get taken after that?
So it was interesting because I didn't even know what a concussion was at that time. I just kept going on, went to the collision center and then afterwards went home. I didn't feel well, so luckily my partner came and picked me up, and then we went to go eat, but I lost my appetite and actually threw up again after I ate dinner, so did not feel good.
Hugo, you sound like you were charming company for that first 12 hours of time after the concussion.
Yeah, I felt alone. I don't know, like I couldn't organize my thoughts. It was crazy.
So at what point do you finally get yourself to a doctor or hospital?
So it wasn't until I think three days after, because the next day I went down. And I remember that TTC ride down to campus was the worst thing of my life. It was just loud noises, lots of light, too many people. And I went in and told my supervisor, my master's supervisor, that I wasn't feeling well. I don't think I should do my presentation, and told him about the car accident. And he was like, I think you have a concussion. You should probably get that checked out. So luckily, I'm part of the faculty of kinesiology. So our lab is right beside our sports medicine clinic. So I went there and talked to the secretary, and she kind of told me this is the procedure you should go to the ER, get it checked out, and also go consult your family doctor. We have a concussion doctor here, so you can check them out too. And it wasn't until I met with them that I understood everything.
Now, I don't want you to infer that this question is being critical, but you waited 3 days before you got any treatment or attention. Why would you wait so long?
Because being a type A person in my master's, I just wanted to, get my work done. I had a lot of commitments and things, so just focused on that. I'm like, my health can wait, and I always hear it might go away, so maybe it's nothing big. And then it wasn't until I guess the symptoms were exacerbated that I realized what a bad state I was in.
And okay, let me go back to Swapna now at this point, and that is, again, when you hear about car accidents, concussions don't necessarily first come to mind. Cuts, scrapes, broken bones, etc. What is it about concussions that we don't apparently seem to want to either recognize or acknowledge that we've sustained one?
Right. Well, I think a lot of that is to do with, you really want to carry on with what you're doing. You want to feel like you're okay. You want to feel like that you can do the activity for your day. I mean, I think with the stories of Calypso and Hugo, we can see that we have people who are very, very passionate about what they do, and they want to continue that. And denial is something that does happen. And I think that's another reason why the awareness and the recognition is very important, so that as soon as something like that does occur, you can think, oh my goodness, that could have been a concussion, because I know what a concussion looks like and I know what that feels like or could feel like, and recognize it in yourself or recognize in someone around you when something like that does happen.
Well, keeping in mind that it's also a very individualized injury, so some of the symptoms that one individual might experience might not be the same as what somebody else might experience. There's a constellation of these types of symptoms that might occur.
But also there are lots of other reasons why someone might not want to recognize a concussion or not want to report it. And there is a stigma around having a brain injury. And so that is another factor for sure.
And then in the workplace, there could be reprisals at work, pressure from others, or kind of feeling like they're weaker than other people, or having that sense from other people themselves. So these are all points that people take into consideration when not reporting.
Well, that's an interesting angle. Calypso, let me follow up with you on that. Has there at any point in your, I don't know if you call it this, your post-concussion journey, has there been any point at which you've thought to yourself, I have to deny this because I don't want to be, I don't know, denied promotions or thought of as less than strong by colleagues or my boss or anything like that? Has that been a part of it?
No, not at all. My boss at the time was wonderful, and she was very willing to adjust work for anyone who had an injury. So, for example, part of my job was driving a tractor, and because of the noise, I just felt like I couldn't do that for the next few weeks. So she was fine with that. It was more just the fact of having to miss work, and since my concussion didn't happen at work, not getting any compensation for that, and feeling like I did have this pressure to return to the workspace just so I would get paid again.
Gotcha. And Hugo, how about you? Was there any aspect of stigma associated with this that you worried about?
Yeah, I would say 2 to 3 parts. First, my family. I come from a very traditional family where I guess concussions aren't a thing. So my dad was like, why are you being lazy, you know, sitting in a room, lights off, just sleeping all the time? You should get work done. You know, you're in your master's, get it done. So he didn't understand that because there's no physical symptoms, there's actually things going on in my head that I wasn't sure of. And then second part, I have friends who have had concussions, but obviously the duration varies person to person. So they're like, oh, it goes away within a week. Like you're still talking about it, you know, you're being a sissy type thing. But luckily, you know, again, my colleagues at the Faculty of Kinesiology were well aware and well versed in concussions. So they helped me kind of support and motivate me throughout the whole process.
So Hugo, this whole awareness thing, this is something we all need to work on. People are not being malingerers when they have head injuries, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, we heard from Calypso that she basically had to go lie on a couch, no lights, no noise for a week. And after that, she felt somewhat better and able to return to her regular duties. How about for you? What was your treatment?
Yeah, same thing. Basically, no lights, you know, no TV, no cell phone, you know, lots of sleep. But I'm not going to lie, I broke those rules. You can only do that for so long and, you know, not want to turn on the news and check out the agenda on TVO. So, yeah, and they told me not to do any exercise to, you know, try to maintain, try not aggravate the symptoms. But actually, it wasn't until I took part in a program called Prime at U of T, where I got to know Sandhya better, that I realized the importance of actually doing exercise, although not at such a high intensity to aggravate your symptoms, and the importance of doing it within the early stages of the concussion to kind of help speed the recovery process. So.
Well, watching the agenda, I guess, seems like a very reasonable exception to the rule of no television, no activities or anything like that. But beyond that, I mean, Hugo, did you not know that every time you played a video game or turned on the news or something that you would be setting back your recovery?
You know, I thought it was worth it because for me, again, I was unaware of the whole concussion thing. So I just, I was like, it won't hurt that much, or it's not going to be a lasting effect. And then like 2 days after, you know, everything just hits you like a wall.
Well, the Mylabathula twins have actually been talking about this for quite a long time, and not just to television audiences or audiences on YouTube. They had a pretty captive audience not too long ago, almost 2 years ago, and we're going to show a clip of that right now. Sheldon, if you would.
The effects of a concussion are not always observable to an onlooker, so it's very much of an invisible injury too. So we know that our brains are quite fragile, and here we have a 3D printed model of a brain, just to kind of show that. And we know that the consistency of the brain, even more so than in this model, is actually quite like that of Jell-O, so that just emphasizes the need to protect it.
Swapna, what were you two doing there testifying at a subcommittee of Parliament on Parliament Hill?
So our journey started 10 years ago, but before we talk about that, we spoke about Jell-O in that example. We have that brain right here.
Same one?
If only. No, we made a new one. Okay. We have a freezer full of brains, Jell-O brains, just in case we need to talk about awareness.
That did sound a little confusing and bizarre for a second there, so thanks for clarifying.
But we do have a whole journey that started about 10 years ago, and we started by, you know, our own interest in hockey, but we very quickly realized that concussions happen in all sorts of arenas of life, including in the workplace and on the road. And that really led to a private members bill that we were able to develop, and our member of parliament at the time, Dr. Kirsty Duncan, sponsored and had it had its first reading. And since then, we've been doing a lot of advocacy and a lot of policy work and a lot of research on our own, because that's what we do for our own research. And that took us a little farther.
Yeah, so what we were asking for was a National Concussion Awareness Week, a pan-Canadian strategy to address prevention, management, diagnosis, awareness in particular, across the country in all provinces and territories, as well as a Center for Excellence for Concussion Research, but also continuing evaluation on any ongoing policy, and an expert advisory board to help make sure that any policy that was in place could continue to evolve with involving research, because it's a very evolving field. And all jokes aside, having a tool like a Jell-O brain is quite useful to help increase awareness, because it really gives you the sense of how fragile our brains are and why it's so important to protect them. And then one more thing I wanted to add there was was it's very interesting about the approaches people take in terms of management, because complete rest used to be sort of almost the gold standard, but that's actually gone now. What we actually advise is to do rest in the period just after your injury, but then you want to have that, as Hugo was mentioning, gradual return to activity and adding some more of that exercise back in, as long as your symptoms are tolerable.
Yeah, so prescribing exercise to the point where you don't trigger symptoms, you don't exacerbate symptoms, but you are avoiding total rest, because we've moved beyond that in the management of concussion.
And it improves mood, increases cerebral blood flow, and can also improve neuroplasticity.
And this is all sorts of things that we talked about in Parliament in 2019 from that clip you just saw when we were speaking to a committee that was talking about concussions.
Okay, I have one dumb follow-up question and then one, I hope, more intelligent follow-up question. The dumb one is, how do you make a Jell-O brain?
Magic.
So it's just Jell-O water and a bit of evaporated milk.
But it looks like a real brain. You got a special mold or something like that to make it in?
We spent 10 hours. We spent 10 hours carving it. No, we do have a mold.
Okay, I told you that was the dumb question. Okay, now here I hope is the better question, which is, all right, you had a lengthy list of things that you wanted to get out of your appearance on Parliament Hill, a National Concussion Awareness Week, and so on. How much of that checklist, Sandhya, you go first. How much of that checklist did you actually get through?
So after we testified on April Fool's Day of 2019 to government, they had a subcommittee on sports-related concussions in Canada as part of a standing committee on health. They spoke to a bunch of different testifiers. So we had witnesses who were people from the sports field, people who were athletes, people who were in healthcare, researchers, advocates such as ourselves. And then in the end, they created a report. For example, included in that report would be the Expert Advisory Board, the National Concussion Awareness Week, and there were pieces in there that are still continuing to move, but after the pandemic started, I think there was a bit of a stopper on that.
Yeah, it put a damper on a lot of things.
So you, fair to say you didn't get through as much as, Parliament didn't pick up as much of the agenda as you hoped they would, is that fair to say?
Not as much as the agenda, but we're continuing to work on that and moving that forward. Things are, of course, slower during the pandemic, but that is something that's continuing.
Now, let me check in with our two concussion patients again. Calypso, tell us, have you had, to this day, any lingering after effects from the concussion?
No, I was very lucky. I would say because I took the week of rest, after about a month, my symptoms were all gone and I was back to normal.
And you're 100% today?
I'm 100% today.
But a lot more careful around horses, I bet.
Especially miniature horses. They're very stubborn.
Especially miniatures. Okay. Hugo, how about for you? Are you concussion symptom-free now?
No, unfortunately not. I'm still working with, my healthcare providers to try to cope with these symptoms and try to mitigate them. And just management. It's all about symptom management at this point.
What are you still feeling?
A lot of stuff. So I'm still having issues, I guess, conveying my thoughts into words and writing. So that's really critical for, I guess, me, especially since I'm doing my PhD now. And then also I have issues with, I guess, it's almost like migraine-like symptoms. Anytime I perform any intensive exercises or strain myself, I tend to burn out easily if I, work on a task for too long. So I have to pace and do a lot of mitigation strategies around that.
And just confirming, this is 3 years after the car accident?
Yeah, three, I guess almost 3.5. Yeah, it's coming. But I never knew it would last that long. And, now I understand the seriousness of concussions.
I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this a fairly depressing prospect that you're dealing with here?
Yeah, definitely. And I always think back to how, I was pre-concussion and compare myself. But what I've learned is that, you got to take everything in strides. And it's not about looking back, more looking forward and how you can improve from there. So these are all kind of, just looking back and it's all about moving forward.
I get you. We're down to our last minute here, and I just want to ask the Steam sisters one last question, and that is, we have had some progress on this issue. We have Rowan's Law in Ontario right now, which really obligates, a much more attention among young people in particular when they're playing sports, for example, to make sure that concussions are diagnosed and people are aware of them and that precautions are taken. Sidney Crosby, got a concussion 10 years ago last month that certainly put a lot of attention onto the issue. I guess I just wonder in our last minute what advice you'd have for people watching this right now. Swapna, why don't you go first?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Thank you. So I think, putting more stock into awareness and recognition is such an important thing. But I would say that prevention is the best cure. We've heard that time and time again. And that is something that really rings true with concussions. And when we're talking about the sporting world, there's lots of things we can do about prevention that we've heard about. But that does apply outside as well. So when we're talking about the workplace, there's lots of things we can do for prevention.
Sandhya, last 20 seconds to you.
Thank you. So in the workplace, some of the things that are important to do is make sure that if you can, avoid those risk factors. So clearing spaces, making sure there are not big objects higher up, that sort of thing. But once the concussion does happen, because we can't prevent every single instance, it's important to kind of have that awareness so people know what to expect. One of the big things that is often missed is the psychological effects of a concussion, the depressive symptoms, anxiety, frustration, isolation, and so on. So that's important to note that that's a thing so that people can know to help other people who have a concussion.
I can't thank the four of you enough for coming on to TVO tonight and really helping us better understand these issues. Sandhya and Swapna Mylabathula, the PhD candidates at the U of T, Calypso Kenny in Mexico, Hugo Fung in Scarborough. Best wishes, everybody. I guess I normally say stay safe to everybody, but that's usually a reference to COVID. I'm going to say stay safe as in watch your heads, everybody, especially to you, Hugo. We really wish you well with your continued recovery.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Monday, February 1st, 2021. Why did Selina Cesar-Chavannes leave the Liberal Party to sit as an independent after 4 years in office? Well, Nam Kiwanuka talks to her tomorrow to find out. Also, we'll check in on the Great Lakes and what difference a new administration south of the border just might make. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.